So we are at 10 o'clock and we have a few students in our Zoom room, and we have our guest speaker here. And I want to begin with, and every time we begin with a little bit of business and a reminder to folks. Well, thank you for taking, this is a poll for any newcomers, for folks coming in, that was designed by our guest. And just as a reminder, what's going on is those people that are here, your task will be to write 2 paragraphs of what you learned, what you thought was interesting. Oh, and by the way, I do like to traditionally, uh, 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 in particular, I'll ask in the questions, in the homework part, but I'll at least give you, our guest, a sample of what some of the students wrote. So you'll see what it's always fun. And so your assignment will be to write 2 paragraphs in response to our guest speaker. The easy thing for the students here will be to take the notes and submit it in our traditional homework section. In the assignments, you'll see it there in the assignments and in the module. But for those people who are not here, who will be watching this on recording, it'll be available as soon as the recording, the Zoom people have it available to us with the transcription. Oh, and I'll get you a copy of it too, Jordan.
Thank you.
And so it'll be available as soon as it's ready. Usually it takes at least a couple hours. And so that, and it'll be, you'll have up until the end of the day tomorrow, to Friday, to submit your 2 paragraphs. Just a reminder that as a part of uh, next week, and our usual time when we do homework is on Wednesday. That's Veterans Day, or when we do homework and classwork. And so what I did was I decided, and it's kind of perfect in the semester, almost perfect, a little bit late, but it's pretty perfect. Is everybody's assignment for next week? The only official thing that you have to do, um, is watch the video Crash next week. But if you, the movie Crash, download it, rent it, buy it, um, find it somewhere, whatever is best for you. If you watch it early, you can, you, because your assignment is to do a midterm, based upon that movie. If you watch it early, if you watch it like say this week, if you watch it now, you could turn in your paper, your midterm early for bonus points, and give me a little bit of extra time to grade your papers, and give you extra time to start working on your final project, which will be coming up pretty quickly. And so keep that in mind, because if all you do is what you're required to do next week, as far as you'll just watch the video, then you'll be, during the following week, you only have a couple days to get your midterm on Crash done. There's a step-by-step instructions in Zoom, not Zoom, in Canvas, to on how to do your midterm. But this is a chance. Oh, and also, we started a new discussion uh, yesterday, yesterday, on connections between different groups. We're starting to learn about all these different ethnic groups. We're going to start we're going to have and African Americans this week. And so now you should be thinking about some of the connections. And we've been seeing thematically, the colonial perspective, and colonization, and African Americans, and American Indians. And then we're going to go into issues of immigration, and Asian Americans and Latinos is one of the ways to look at them. but there are all kinds of ways to look at similarities between these different groups. And it's a big part of our guest as far as making connections as far and part of my research. I don't know if I mentioned my dissertation was on interracial marriages, Jordan. So I look forward to hearing from you on that part of your background. And so that's about it as far as intro. And look, 5 minutes exactly. Uh, um, unless anybody's got any business related stuff related to class, what you should be dealing with is our homework, getting ready for your midterm, and doing our discussion. Okay, well, without any further ado, we've given plenty of time for any latecomers, and at least we have a couple students, so that's really nice. Um, we're going to have our guest speaker. You folks have been told about having Jordan share with us his bio. Was very impressed with him over the summer when I heard him as a guest at the Stonewall Democrats. And so I asked him to come to one of my classes and didn't quite make it to the summer. And so he's here now. And really excited to have him. He'll tell us a little bit more about his life and who he is. Here is Jordan. Go for it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Hossein Hedman, and I'll be presenting today on being a minority in America with LGBTQ perspectives. Can you see my share screen pretty clear? Perfect. All right. So first, I want to start off by kind of giving a thank you to the people of the land, so like Native Americans and indigenous folks, and also giving a thanks to forced labor that was used to build much of what we know today. So I try to start off everything with that, and I'm going to say my pronouns, which are he, him, and his. So that's what I go by if you have to reference to me. I am 22 years old and I work at the Sacramento LGBT Center as the Pride Director and Events Manager. I also serve on the Stonewall Democrats Board for their communications chair, as Walter mentioned. So I'm going to dive right in. You all covered a lot of what a minority is earlier on in the year, but I'm just going to skim through it. So being a minority is kind of like being a ethnically or racially distinct group that coexists within a dominant group. And sometimes that dominant group isn't larger than the group of minorities, but the status quo is based on that dominant group. So I'm going to dive into a lot about myself. I am Jamaican and Trinidadian. I was born in Miami, Florida in 1998, so I'm a little baby. Um, and my mom is of Jamaican descent, and my father is of Trinidadian descent. They met in Jamaica, and my mom had me in America. After finding out she was pregnant, she decided to migrate to the States, where much of her family lived, so that I could have more opportunities than I would get in Jamaica at the time. So fairly diverse, just on that level there. Not sure if this went blue for you all, but let me make sure. Is this screen share blue on half of it for you all?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if we can do it. I'm just gonna leave it here. So my mom is actually multiracial herself. Half her father's side migrated from Germany. They were Jewish folks that were fleeing prior to Hitler, and the other half of her family was of African descent. And then on my father's side, like many Trinidadians, my father's parents migrated from Pakistan to Trinidad later on in their life because they had a lot of kids and they wanted to be closer to some of their family, which migrated earlier on. So after being born in America, my mom took me back to Jamaica until I was about 5 years old. Mainly because my mom didn't necessarily want to move to America for herself, but wanted to move to America to provide me with opportunities and the ability to go to a free public school and move anywhere I wanted to within the States. Uh, so we moved back when it was time for me to go to school, and I first lived in Georgia. So we moved to Stone Mountain, Georgia first. I lived there for a very short period, don't remember much about it. And I've been back to visit my aunt that still lives there. And after that, I moved to Miramar, Florida, which you can see I included the statistics for on the right-hand side. My mom fell in love with Florida, specifically Miramar, because it was so multicultural and diverse. The issue with Stone Mountain was that it was very divided. There were clear lines of like, white neighborhoods and Black neighborhoods. And my mom found it very hard to exist within either of those because she had such a strong accent, but she was raising, like an African American child. And she wanted to provide me the experiences of being Black in America without being degraded for not sounding American. So when we moved to Florida, there were a number of different cultures that we intermingled with. I always joke around and say I didn't have the chance to meet a fully white person until I left Florida, Miramar, Florida. I went to Plantation. It was so diverse and so multicultural. It was just everyone was from somewhere. Even if they appeared white with blue eyes, they were from Spain or they were from the United Kingdom. Everyone moved there from somewhere, and it was a very nice experience, right? Um, so that was a fun time for me. I attended elementary school, middle school, and high school in Miramar, Florida. And I didn't really experience a ton of racism in that area, but I traveled quite a bit while I was in elementary school and middle school with my mom. So we traveled to almost all of the states in the United States. And I was very young when I had my first negative experience. Just being the skin color that I was. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and we went to Mississippi to visit a family member. And the drive was much longer than we thought. So we stopped and spent a night in a hotel randomly. And my grandma on my mom's side went in and booked the hotel. And when the rest of us came in, they said, maybe you should stay somewhere else. And that was the first experience where I was like, why are we leaving? I was so young and naive, and I wanted to go to this hotel because it was beautiful. And I couldn't understand why we couldn't stay there. And later down the road, we stayed in the car all together because none of the hotels wanted to allow this like interracial family to stay. And this was like mid 2000s, so it was quite an odd time. It was during Bush, but it was also fairly progressive time in places like Myanmar where things were very diverse. And when you live in the bubble, you don't really get to experience the negative sides of just being the color that you are. So later on, my mom told me about racism and told me, not to have prejudice against people and to kind of understand that sometimes those folks don't get to live the experiences that you do, they're not around a lot of people of color, and they don't necessarily get to learn, they don't have access to education. So to live a life where, yes, you are proud to be who you are, but you're also willing to tell people, hey, it's wrong to be prejudiced against someone just because of the skin color that they are. I'm going to skip a little bit further down in my life. I was about 12 years old when I went to Stone Mountain again. I stayed with my aunt for 3 months in the summer. We had a hurricane, so school closed early. In Florida, if you had like a hurricane early on in the year, the school year would just end. And you would just go on summer break, which was a great time for us. It was party time for all of us. But my mom was like, nope, you're going to go to your aunt's house in Georgia, and you're going to help her move into her new home because she was retiring. And I was so excited for this. I loved traveling at the time, and it was the first time I was ever flying by myself. So I was very excited. It was on Airways, which is a very southern airline company. They normally fly from Georgia to Florida. You'll see a lot of country bands on that airline, and now they are no longer in business. They were bought out by Southwest. But I got onto the plane, and I went through TSA, and the first experience I had was being called into a room to be pat down. And of course, I called my mom. I was young. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And the lady asked me where I was from, and I was like, "Oh, I'm American. I'm African American. My parents are from the Caribbean." And she was said, "Your last name is not American." And my last name is Hossein Hedman. One's my mom's, one's my dad's. And I ended up being late for my flight because they were doing different checks. They pat me down, they searched my bag, they asked me everything that was in there. And of course I cried being young and called my mom and, asked her what to do. And eventually I got onto a flight and made it to Atlanta, and still very blind to the fact of, my skin color in America, just because of the community I grew up in, was very accepting. There was so many different cultures that it never came to question why I would, look down on any other one, or why any other culture would look down on mine. Um, so in Georgia, that was living there for a couple months. I had a couple of experiences where I learned about, the Black diaspora in America and how people lived in other communities, and not just what it was like in mine, because I got to experience going to the Jehovah Witnesses church in Stone Mountain, Georgia. My aunt was Jehovah Witness, and every week we would go to church. It didn't matter if I wanted to go or not, we were going. And I got to meet a lot of people that were my age, that grew up in a world where people didn't cross the lines of the color of their skin. Um, it was kind of the first time where I had a group of friends and we all looked the same in a way. All my group of friends back home in Miramar, there was like someone from Jamaica, someone from Europe, someone from Asia, someone from Africa. We were a group from everywhere. So it was kind of a shock. I remember calling my mom and being like, "Oh my God, Mom, I have all my friends, like they look like me." And we went to knock on doors in another neighborhood, and it was a predominantly white neighborhood. And someone screamed, some negative words at us for being a group of colored folks in their neighborhood. And I started to realize that there was a very big, there was a lot of segregation in neighborhoods in Georgia. And I asked my aunt, "How come you don't have any friends that don't look like you?" And she said, "Well, here, we don't talk a lot to people that don't look like us. We're not accepted by them." And I would say this was a very big turning point in my life. We went to the Apple store while I was there, and it's in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is predominantly a white neighborhood. Alpharetta was known for not allowing people of color into their city or to buy homes during redlining just 40, 50 years ago. So we went into Apple, and everyone was being talked to by the associates. And I wanted a little shuffle. I don't know if you all remember the little shuffle iPod. It was like this big and it only had 4 buttons on it. And my aunt said she would buy it for me. So we were so excited. I was waiting for an associate to come over and no one came. So I went up to someone and I was like, "Hey, how much is this?" And they kind of just dismissed me. And my aunt said, "No, we're going to leave." And I was like, "No, I really want the shuffle. I don't want to leave." And we ended up leaving. And she explained, if people don't want you in a place, and, it's uncomfortable for you to be there and no one wants to help you out, then it's okay to leave and go to somewhere that makes you feel more comfortable. Um, Somewhere that supports you, to vote with your dollars. This was the first time that I heard this term. It was, buy where you are accepted, and buy goods where you're supported from places that support you. uh, after this short time in Georgia, I actually went back to Florida. And in Florida, I had recently moved schools to be in a better school district in Miramar. So Miramar is a pretty large city. There's about 150,000 people, and it's about 20 minutes away from Miami, which in itself has hundreds of thousands of people as well. So my mom wanted to give me more opportunities going to a school that had STEM academic programs, higher graduation rate than in the area that we lived in. So we moved about 10 miles west to where my aunt lived, and I went to Glades Middle School. And at this time, I kind of had all these thoughts in my head about racism in America and how I can't believe I experienced all this racism in Georgia. It was just 2 hours away by flight. I can't believe it's so different. And I started in the school, and it was also very diverse. Miramar, in a whole, even in the upper class neighborhoods, are very, very diverse. The school was like 95% Hispanic, non-white, which is a very large population in Florida. And it's not just a color, as we know, there are dark-skinned Hispanic folks, light-skinned Hispanic folks, so it was very diverse. And this is where I started to understand the divide of the working class among being a person of color. Kind of learning that, even though it is super diverse here, it's more likely when you are an African American or a darker skinned individual for you to land on the working class spectrum of the income level in America, right? And I didn't realize my entire life that I had been living within this working class bubble, if you will say, because I was a child of a single mother. And my father at the time did not pay child support and was not in America to be found either. So my mom, with just a diploma, carried the weight of me, my grandma, her making about $12 an hour her entire career up until I was in senior year, supporting all of us. I never realized that that was a struggle that we had. I was always kind of excited to have what I had, like go outside and play soccer and run in the grass. I was excited to do all those things. So in this time in middle school, when we were in a more affluent neighborhood and people drove different cars, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a touch screen in this car, and all these different things that I started to learn. I started realizing that the darker you were in that time period, even in the most diverse neighborhoods, you were more likely to not have those opportunities coming into life, not born with the opportunity to have material things that could benefit you later in life, or have the time and the money to have a tutor to send you to a better school. So I decided to learn more about the history of America during this time. I had time on my hands. I was a middle schooler. I loved to learn. I loved to travel at the time. I was also an only child. So I had a lot of time to just go and look for things on the internet at school. My mom would be at work, and I would stay in the school library until about 7 p.m. and then she would pick me up. So I had all this time where I could do this research. So I started to learn about Black Wall Street and things that weren't taught necessarily in middle school and elementary school about, African American history. So I started to get in touch with what it meant to be Black in America. And in that time, I also started to do research on why Obama was the first Black president. I had no understanding as to why there weren't any before at that time. So I started to learn about, slavery didn't just come to an end. There was still, segregation. And for years, even after that, we've been silently racist. We haven't been able to talk about the things that we're starting to talk about now, like police brutality, unequal justice times for folks that are caught using drugs, excess policing in predominantly Black neighborhoods, things like that. I knew as a reality, but I also thought it was something everyone faced in the US. I didn't realize that it wasn't something that happened in certain neighborhoods. So skip forward a little bit. My junior year of high school, I took a trip to California with my mom for spring break. I wanted to go to San Luis Obispo, so we came, we looked at the school, uh, and I fell in love with the state. I realized that I kind of came to terms with being gay. I always knew that I didn't have an attraction to anyone, is kind of what I said during my high school years. And I realized, oh my God, there's this gay Mecca, San Francisco. Everyone is just holding hands and they're happy. There's no judgment. And coming from a Baptist Christian background, those weren't things that I learned to be good. Uh, those were things that I was like, this is not good. But in my mind, I felt like we should be able to accept everyone. So while I was here, I did some research about atheism and agnostic background, and got to meet a group of folks here in Sacramento, actually, the agnostic group, for just like tea or coffee or whatever it was at the time. And I told my mom, oh, it's for school. I'm going to go meet these folks for school down the street. And I met them, and I got to this whole perspective on being gay from them, that this is not a bad thing. And they gave me articles to read, and it opened my mind so much more than I could have thought, especially for a 16-year-old. I was like mind blown. So we went home back to Florida, and I told my mom, I want to move to California. That's it. I don't want to stay here. It's going to be better for me if I want to go on to college for in-state tuition. I'll get a job. We'll save money. Like, we will do this together and move. And my mom is very supportive of her only son, only child. And she said, if that's what you want, in 2 months, we'll look back at it. And if you're willing to save money and do it, then I'll support you. And a couple months later, we decided to do that. My mom works at FedEx, and her job's fairly transferable. She can work at different airports and still go to like a home base. So she transferred to Sacramento International Airport, and we stayed with a friend of my mom in South Sacramento. And this again was another testing time for me, because it was predominantly one skin color in one neighborhood. And it reminded me of Georgia again. And I told my mom, wow, the houses, they look like Georgia, and it's segregated like Georgia again. And we were told, Sacramento is the most diverse city in California, but it was still so shocking to me that within these neighborhoods, within these school districts, it was predominantly either white in like the northern area of Sacramento, or Black or Asian or Latino in the southern and central parts of Sacramento. And I wanted to attend a school that had a good graduation rate, had STEM academics that were available. And I looked at John F. Kennedy and Bella Vista High School. That was my senior year. So I wanted to do really good. I wanted it to be my best experience. And we settled on Bella Vista, which was also very hard decision, because it was such a white school. When I started, it was fairly higher income brackets, and it was just me and my mom. I was working at In-N-Out and going to school, finishing my last year. And something hit me on my first day of attending school there. Someone said, I like your eyes. And I was like, oh, they're brown. Everyone's eyes are brown. Like, everyone's eyes are brown. And I looked around the room, and everyone's eyes were blue or green. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of segregation within communities that are so close to us. We don't realize that a lot of people don't have the opportunity just in the suburbs of Sacramento to meet people that don't look like them, and meet people that come from cultures that were different. I quickly became the boy from Miami at Bella Vista, because it was clear that I wasn't from California. I listened to different music. In Florida, we listened to reggae, reggaeton, like a lot of Caribbean music. And everyone was talking about people like Halsey and all these different artists. And I was like, who are these people? Like, I've never heard this music before. And they're like, what? This is all we listen to? And I'm like, yeah, no, this is not what I listened to when I was growing up. And this is not what I listened to just last year. So everyone started asking me questions about, where I'm from and what it's like growing up in Miami. And I started asking them the same questions, and like what it meant to be American to them, and like, what they grew up listening to, and rock, and the Beatles, and all of these things that I wasn't taught as a kid because my parents uh, migrated from a Black country. So I'm going to start with the pros of, moving so much and being able to experience all of these things, is that I definitely got to learn at a young age that your culture is not the only culture. Your mindset is not the only one. And your outlook on life is also not the only outlook you should have. There's many lived experiences from different people on any side of the aisle, right? And we can't uh, be so harsh on folks because of their lived experiences. If I never had the opportunity to move to all these places, I wouldn't have been able to join Stonewall or come out at an early age, move to California. All of those experiences made me who I am today. Um, and then the cons of those things is sometimes you question yourself a lot. You question where you're from and your identity and what it means to be you all the time. Some of the negative sides of it is I've grown to the fact that in places of work and in friend groups, a lot of times you are doubted or deemed scary when loud because of the color of your skin. And it's not necessarily directly stated in the beginning, but a lot of times folks will say something without realizing the context of it. So I'll give an example. During this time, June, July, when I met Walter, I started an All Black Lives Coalition, uh, kind of a sister coalition to the Black Lives Matter movement, encompassing queer folks, LGBTQ, non-binary. Um, and a lot of people that I knew in my day-to-day life that I considered friends said I was all of a sudden very scary to them, very loud, kind of scary to be around. And at first, uh, because of a lot of the experiences that I've had that have been negative, I kind of took the back seat and said, I'm sorry for being, that way to you, even though I knew I wasn't screaming or being vulgar to anyone. It was kind of just stating my opinion and saying what the lived experience was, and saying basically, Black Lives Matter, we need to do something about it. That was scary to them. And that's one of the cons of moving so much, is that you put your own opinions on the back seat, especially when you're a darker individual in America, and a person of many minorities in this country as well. Uh, I'm not only Black in America, I'm also an immigrant or a second generation immigrant to a multiracial family. I'm also gay openly, and a lot of times those intersections are hard to find for someone that's Black, because you're not as accepted in the queer community as a darker individual as you should be. When I started here at the center, I really wanted to get involved with Pride. And when it came around the issue of policing and security, it was a very big toss up for me, because I couldn't understand why both parties couldn't come together. And my first week in the job, I realized that I was the first Pride director to be a person of color in Sacramento in over 30 years. Never have we ever had a Pride director that was Asian American, Latinx, Black, multiracial. They've all been white. Um, and I was like, oh, this is cool, but why haven't we had one before? And maybe it's just Sacramento. And I traveled to meet other Pride directors, and someone looked at me and said, oh my God, I'm so glad that we have a person of color. And I was like taken back for a second, because first, I didn't expect someone to say that to me. And second, I expected there to be more people of color. we went to like it was a conference, and there was one room for minorities to meet other minorities. And only two people showed up in that room, and both of us worked here in Sacramento. And it was every pride across the nation that met at the conference. And it was, it kind of reminded me of being in the Apple store in Atlanta again, where every time you had an idea, even if it was the same as someone, your counterpart that was white, it was kind of questioned because they'd never seen someone like you in this, doing this role before. So if you said the napkin was blue, they were like, is it blue? You know, this is your first time here. We don't know. We've never seen someone like you. And it became a thing that repeated multiple times. And it's something we wrongfully put on the back seat. You know, that's something we should be able to confront and say, hey, this should not be happening. You know, I respect your lived experiences, and I want you to treat me just like you would treat your white counterpart, you know, not question what I'm trying to tell you just because you might not have an experience with me. And that kind of leads to discovering myself. So when I started the job, I didn't really think it was going to be a time for me to push for QTPOC, which stands for Queer and Trans People of Color issues. I kind of thought those things would be at the forefront of the LGBTQ community when I started. And after that conference, I kind of discovered that there wasn't many people in those spaces fighting for those people. And I realized, hey, I need to put my community at the forefront and advocate as much as possible, not only just to hold space and have people listen, but mentor folks that look like me, get mentorship from people that look like me, uplift people that are artists in the community, that are people of color, that don't have the investors, maybe a small loan, as some people say, from their parents to start a company, you know, to start uplifting those folks in the community that didn't necessarily have those chances to, you know, make it as big as their white counterparts due to lack of income, and or due to income inequalities, or education inequalities and segregation in cities like Sacramento and many others across the US. And that kind of led to a lot of challenges. A lot of people liked me when I was quiet. A lot of people love to have, you know, their Black friend that doesn't speak up. And the moment that I started advocating for holding space for people, and, you know, training people that were interested in things like building zones at Pride that haven't done it before, it became a challenge. It became a why, and it became the typical questioning of, you know, why do we have to change, which is valid. But when we claim we want to uplift people of color, we have to make changes within our structural systems. And some of these challenges that I face, in addition to what I've already said, come to a lot of stereotypes. I remember right after the All Black Lives meeting with Stonewall, I had a friend reach out to me, and they were like, why are all Black folks so loud? And I was like, did you really just say that? You know, you're a person of color, you should know better. And again, I took a back seat and I said, what makes you think all Black folks are loud and, you know, boisterous and rude? And she was like, well, it's just my experiences with them. And I was like, well, do you have a lot of Black and brown friends? And her response was no. And I was like, have you thought about why? And she was like, well, the neighborhood I was in was predominantly white. And I was like, well, don't you think that's like a systemic problem? You know, if you live in a neighborhood where you don't have an opportunity to meet people that are African American. And it opened a large door to a really good friendship where now we're both more aware um, of the things we face on the daily, of our privileges and lack thereof uh, in our daily lives, things we're born with, things we're not born with, whether it be parents or a higher income or being in a neighborhood where we don't have the ability to meet people of color. Um, and that kind of is a way I try to mitigate stereotypes like being loud or I get a lot of the time, you sound white. Uh, and sometimes, a lot of times when I was younger, I kind of took it as a bad thing because when I moved to America, I did have an accent and I got made fun of, not by people in my community, but just by random people at the store. If we went to like a Walmart in another area, they'd be like, "Why do you sound like that?" Or when we were traveling, they'd be like, "What are you saying?" Um, and it made me want to sound more American when I was younger. It made me want to sound more well spoken as I was taught. Uh, and now I feel like I speak very clear, like an American, very clear English, and I don't necessarily think it's something I would have wanted to lose if I could have turned back the clock. Instead of listening to what other people were saying around me, I could have enjoyed who I was, and that's a stereotype I hope to also help put an end to. Instead of people saying you sound white, you just sound like an American. I never really got that whole thing. I kind of just sound like I'm speaking English. So I'm gonna continue down. Kind of touched on this, how we change this, and then it goes into why being involved in the community is so important. I touched on holding space for people that don't get to speak as much, holding space for folks that aren't in the room, right? We talk about it when it comes to voting. It's voting for the people who can't, voting for the people who don't get time off work, voting for the people who aren't legal workers, undocumented workers, voting for people who are Black, voting for people who have their rights on the lines, like uh, queer people in many states and trans people in many states face severe oppression compared to states like California. Uh, in many states, if you identify as agnostic or non-religious, you can't even run for public office. States like South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, which is something we shouldn't judge someone who is holding office based off of what they believe or who they pray to, um, in a free country like America. So making sure we hold space and vote and mentor and uplift where it's requested instead of deciding for people what's best for them, as much as possible, right? And a lot of that is being involved in the community. Sometimes I end up speaking up at some organizations where they want to make a decision as an all-white leadership on what they should do for the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And I always ask, have you asked anyone in your organization that works there, that's a person of color, what they would like you to do? And most of the times the answer is no. A lot of times, even in our own organization, before, the answer was no. And those questions to leadership sometimes can be hard to make or hard to ask, but it's important for places to grow, to do better, to improve, to have a system that works for us as well. Is having those hard conversations and asking those hard questions, even when we don't want to. Um, so I'm going to dive into a couple organizations. I have the LGBT Center listed here and Stonewall, just because those are two that I'm involved in. And why it's important to be involved in the community, whether you're LGBTQ plus or not. The LGBTQ Center is made for people that are allies, non-binary. You don't have to be queer, you can be queer, to engage with young folks, right? Come together via Zoom now or in person for pictures, socially distant, to uplift one another, to create space for the most marginalized, to provide resources for communities that are at high risk. Um, and places like the LGBT Center, the GHC, the Lavender Library, the Meadowview Community Center do a lot of great work, but without people like me, you going to those places to help them grow. Going there, it can be doing as little as volunteering for an event they have and helping to poll folks, that are there and ask them questions, or helping to spread the knowledge of resources does a lot for all of these organizations and community centers. It gets the knowledge out that there's free COVID testing at the Sacramento LGBT Center on Mondays and Tuesdays from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. for free to all community members, whether you are LGBTQ or not. Um, those are things that can help save lives. If one person that was in contact with an elderly folk uh, knows that they have COVID and they stay out of contact with that one person, that's one life that's being saved. That's one relationship that doesn't have to be ended. So I always encourage folks to be involved as much as they can, anywhere that they like. I have a friend, Melissa. She is an ally of the community and she serves on our Pride Committee. She was very scared in the beginning. She was like, I don't want to take a large role because I'm an ally, and I'm like, LGBTQIA includes allies. It includes folks that aren't just queer, gay, lesbian, trans. If you're a friend of the community, you are the community. Um, and and if that helps anyone else join as well, you can come with your family. It's not just the typical. When I told my mom I work at the LGBTQ center, she was like, it's not one of those where like they're naked and they jump around in the streets, right? And I was like, Mom, we do pumpkin paintings for kids in high school and elementary school, where we get pumpkins from the pumpkin patch and we paint it via Zoom. And we have people that are on our city council that help out, school districts that participate. It's not just people jumping around naked in San Francisco. And she was like, what? That's crazy. So she followed our Facebook, and to her amazement, she was like, oh my God, you do other things. Like, this is great. I'm so proud. But a lot of people don't realize that these things happen. There's a group called Queer Voices here, and it's made for people who are queer, non-binary, or an ally to go and speak their truths. So kind of gives you a space to be a poet, tell your story a little bit to different schools and different groups, whether it be fire department or the city council, so folks can learn about you, learn about what the community is, learn about the people in their community, who they represent. And it doesn't have to be the LGBTQ center. It doesn't have to be the GHC, but being involved in your community is super important. When I was younger, I did a trash pickup. In middle school, I was served on our student government, and we did a number of things during that time because I had so many experiences I was learning from. Trayvon Martin was murdered that year when I was in middle school, and we organized with other student governments to do a walkout. And every middle school in our school district walked out. More than 100,000 students walked off of campus, risked being expelled, and walked across cities to prove a point. That even though we live in a diverse area of the community, doesn't mean that these prejudices don't exist within our state. And doing that grassroots work in the community brings us together more than ever. I remember walking out of choir, and my teacher said, if you leave, I'm giving you detention. And I sat there and I was like, I don't want detention, but I can't let the people that I already told to walk out down. And I walked out, and it was almost our entire school that showed up outside to march. And there's like 10 of us on student government, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, one share, one text, one person showing up in a community setting can make such a big difference in everyone's lives. Um, I'll move down a little bit to Stonewall. I found Stonewall thanks to this man right here, Lance Nalligan, and a friend of mine, Jackie Faust. Uh, and I was so happy that I did. I had no idea that there were political campaigning groups or organizational groups like this that advocated for the rights of LGBTQ folks and the rights of people regardless of their sexual orientation. Um, as a part of it under Tim, and Tim showed up to our All Black Lives March and gave me some really good advice and some mentorship that I highly value now. And after Tim stepped down, I decided to join the board as their communications chair. And it's been quite a learning experience for me too, to write emails that are, people want to read and get all the information out to people in a timely manner. But this is also another way that we can join the community in showing your support for a vote or for a club or for a group. Your vote is your dollar is your vote. When you spend money at somewhere like Walmart, it will go to wherever Walmart allocates their funds or their income to. If they decide to fund a certain campaign or fund items that are made by underage workers in a country like Pakistan. When we buy Nikes and they're made in factories that are using child labor, that is our vote, as much as it is a vote when you vote in November every 4 years. And joining a group like this kind of gives your opinion a little bit more voice in the community, a little more weight. It gets people to start thinking, not too long ago, groups like Stonewall and other groups might have been like, should we join Black Lives Matter? We should we support? What is it? What do we learn about it? And now we see groups like this in full support, showing up to the marches, showing up when it comes to making policy changes. And that's because of the people that show up in the community to these groups to make that change. Being involved in the community is key to ensuring that there is change and change continues. And, we improve the state of our union, something that hasn't been mentioned at all this election season by either side. That was mentioned almost every week by presidents like Obama and George Bush, is that we are all in this together to improve the state of the union. We are one country, we are one union. And to make it a better place, we all have to work together. And that means showing up in the community and making the changes in your area so they can grow to a nationwide change. This is our last slide. The future of the world is in our hands. Even when it feels so out of reach, we must keep going. I put the world, not just the US, because we don't realize until we start traveling abroad how much of an influence the United States has on other countries. Something I always found weird, I was like, why is it that, European countries, they walk places, they take public transit, they have access to a lot of public transit. They take the train, they take the bus. Why is it that in America, we drive so much? We don't have that choice. And why is it that in American influenced countries, like countries in the Caribbean and Latin America, they drive so much too? And I started realizing that it's because of the influence that America has on a lot of third world or developing countries. A lot of these countries look up to America and they see us driving and they're like, this is the definition of freedom, without realizing that there are other options out there. And when they start driving and start polluting using gasoline as much as we do, that affects the world. It continues on to developing countries and they develop to be like us. But if we start here in a developed nation and other developed nations, a key of change, if you will, a book of change, a way to live a better life, what we've learned from what we've lived, and explain that to everyone around us, they can live a better life and they can do it in a more just way too. So being involved in the community, holding space, mentoring, being an advocate for folks that can't advocate for themselves, people who are unhoused, people who face mental illness challenges, um, is 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 the air in your hands. You have to be able to hold it and give it a leap, give it a little push, you know? If you saw a baby duck struggling to get off the curb of a sidewalk, you give it a little push. And humanity is that little baby duck. And each of us, if we give it a little push, will make it off of the curb, no matter how much we struggle and no matter how much we are divided. So thank you for joining me today. I hope everyone gets a chance to answer some of the poll questions. And if you're at home, not here in the live, I'm not too sure if you can see the poll questions, but they're mainly about your experiences and your lived experience here in Sacramento and wherever you may be. So thank you. My name is Jordan, and I encourage you to get out there in your community, visit the LGBT Center, volunteer, get your free COVID test, HIV test, STD test, tell your friend about it, join groups like Stonewall and advocate for your community. Even if it's not the same as mine, we should advocate for all. So thank you.
Thank you, George. You filled up most of the hour, but I want to open it up to questions from the people that are here. Alina, Kaylee, either of you got any questions for our guest?
Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Alina.
Nice to meet you. Nice that you go to our meeting today. I learn a lot from your experience. I'm Russian and I moved 4 years ago to United States, and I started to learn about how to live people different in the United States, like how they experience different life here just 4 years ago. And in Russian, of course, I didn't see people like different color of me. Yeah, because I live in almost white during almost white community. Here, of course, I have different experience, and my eyes are always open when I read or watch some information, like information which our professor gives us. It's very interesting and it's very impact me and impact of my life. I how it's called, maybe I behavior differently before that I started to take sociology courses. Yeah, it's very important to learn from history why African American have problems here, still have problems here. Yeah, I'm glad that you was here and you teach us.
Thank you for having me as a guest in the class too.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. My best friend when I moved here was actually migrated from Ukraine. So I learned a little bit of Russian, and their family would always cook like borscht as a
yeah,
yep.
This is soup. Yeah.
And that was a fun time too, because I got to learn the experiences of, like, my friend was like, I don't want to be racist, but I want to ask, like, what is it like being, a person of color in the US? Because I only know like my Russian community. And we ended up being such close friends, and they brought me to the Russian church, and I would bring them like to the community center here. And it was such a great learning experience for both of us, because I got to like eat some good Russian food and also meet some great people and learn about their experiences. And they were so open when they found out, like, oh my gosh, like all these things I didn't know about. Like I didn't
Yeah,
know
sure.
this way, and they're so open, and it's so nice to see like the immigrant mentality of everyone kind of just coming together and, you know, working hard to understand each other. So it's a pleasure to meet you, Alina.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kaylee?
Hi, Jordan. My name's Kaylee. My question was that as a queer Black man, and given your experiences in Georgia, Florida, and Sacramento and Fair Oaks, would you say you feel safer in spaces where people are more like you, like whether it be in terms of race or cultural background or sexuality, or in more diverse spaces?
Yeah, this is a great question, Kaylee. I actually went home for Christmas last year, and I found myself asking this question so much because my mom still lives in Miramar, which is very diverse, a lot of people that look like me. And I did have a feeling of feeling less safe than I do every day in Sacramento. Our group is like Jamaican and Trinidadian, like the people that roll in my family, who are there of African American descent. And it's kind of challenging because a lot of times being gay is second to that in their eyes. You know, it's been so indoctrinated through slavery and the colonization of the world by the British that being gay is not okay. That a lot of Black nations and a lot of African Americans have kind of taken that from the colonizer, that it's not something we should do. And it's still alive today in those communities. So when I go home, I do tend to feel a little less safe as a gay man, but I do feel a lot more safe as a Black man. I don't feel like I look in the mirror as much when I'm driving to see if a police is following me. When I'm home in Florida, that doesn't exist because the police department looks a lot like me. They're a lot more friendlier. But here in Sacramento and in Fair Oaks, I do feel much safer as a gay man. They're not a lot of derogatory terms, but at the same time, I am not fully accepted into the gay community as a Black man, sadly, even in Sacramento. I think the safest I've ever felt in any city, I've had the privilege to travel a lot, and it was in Toronto, of all places. I was actually very shocked because I thought it would have been New York or Chicago or somewhere very diverse. The safest I have ever felt in a city for an extended period was Toronto. I definitely didn't feel safe in Georgia. I don't like going to Georgia at all, to be honest with you. But to my shock, Toronto has been the place that I have felt safest as a gay, Black, multiracial person. I don't see myself living in the cold because I love the heat. But it's quite the experience. And Sacramento comes close, and I think every day it gets better. But I hope that answers your question. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for sharing. I feel like I'm similar. Like if I'm around, I'm Latina, so if I feel like when I go back to my parents' home country and I'm around other people, I feel unsafe, but I feel unsafe because here, if I'm around other Latinos, I feel like we're more likely to be threatened and stuff like that. So it's kind of like that mentality that I could go back and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of Latinos here because we're in Latin America, duh.
Yeah.
So I'm just like all worried and like looking behind my back and I'm like, oh, okay, where's the threat coming from? Like what's happening? And especially, but it's not mainly for my safety because I'm a white Latina and like everyone, I just identify as white. Like if nobody asks like my ethnicity background, it's just safer. I think like for me, like sadly, that's how it is. And then most of my family are brown. So like I feel like for their safety, like if I'm around them, it's just like I don't feel like we should be like all congregating together. It feels like it's a greater chance of a threat or of other people coming in and like using derogatory terms for like insulting them, telling them like all kinds of stuff, you know? So like for me, it's kind of similar. Like I want to feel safe with people that look around like that look like me and are part of my community and same background culturally and ethnically. But at the same time, it's always like looking behind your back and like, seeing where a threat is going to come. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing as well. It was, I'm glad to hear that you've been able to think these things through too outside of school and outside of this discussion as well. So I'm glad to hear. And if anyone is interested in volunteering or getting COVID testing at the LGBT Center, you can just show up Monday, Tuesday. It is free. There's no ID necessary, and there's no sign up necessary either. And there's free parking in the lot as well. But if you're interested in ever volunteering, joining Pride, or participating in, you can feel free to email me. My email is jordan.hossein, which is HOSEIN-HEDMANN @saccenter.org. And I'll put it in the chat as well to make it easier too.
Great. So, I got, it's great. We had some time to meet before we got official, and I had a bunch of questions prepared, but I think we had some, you gave us a lot of information, and it was great that the students got a chance to ask some questions and say hi. I'm very, I'm always aware of, what I told folks. As far as I said, it would be around an hour, and it's been around an hour. And so I don't, you probably got stuff to do, and the students have stuff to do. And so just wanted to like say, let's unless anybody has any questions and or concerns or issues related to class that they want to bring up, I think we should pretty much end it right about here and say thank you very much for visiting our class, and gonna pretty much end it there. Anybody? One last try, one last chance for anything related to class, or one more question for our guest, or any last thing you wanted to say before you ended it there, Jordan? Okay. Anything happening in November that you want to share with the group? And or I was wondering, hear those different tests. Will you guys be offering flu shots as well?
Yes, so we're actually doing free flu shots here as well. So I think it's Wednesdays and Thursdays in the afternoon or evening.
Mm-hmm.
And we're partnering, I think it's Pusey's Pharmacy. So if you get a pass here, you can actually go and get a free flu shot there as well. And for Thanksgiving, on Thanksgiving Day, we're going to be having a Friendsgiving food give out. So we are taking food donations, canned food, cooked food, and sodas here at the center at any time. We're on Thanksgiving from 12 to 2. We're going to be handing it out to unhoused folks or folks in the community. And we'll have seating in our parking lot, which is fairly large, so it'll be socially distant for folks that want to be with their chosen family, or they want to, create a nice safe space for folks that might not have a place to go. I'll be here until about 2:33. So we'll have a tent up outside and some chairs out, and food, music, and a good time for anyone that wants to come and join, help clean up or set up, or hand out food as well. Feel free to contact or just go on the website too, and my email is also there.
I always tell folks that if you're not into Thanksgiving, as far as from a Native perspective, and all of the frustrations with that as a holiday, or Indigenous Peoples Day, it's also Hmong New Year, so you can celebrate Hmong New Year over at the Pride Center, or LGBTQ Center. Great, thank you very much. Thank you, students, for showing up. Again, this will be recorded and posted in Canvas as soon as it's available. I'm going to end the recording. Let me see here. Stop recording.